Welcome, horror lovers! The story we'll share with you today came from an anonymous source who identified himself simply as Mark. We can't verify its authenticity, but if it turns out to be true, it would mean that one of the happiest and most innocent cartoons in the world would be hiding a horrifying and bloody secret. It happened about 15 years ago. Mark lived with his parents on a farm in the middle of the English countryside. A few meters away from their farm lived another family, the Smiths, who raised pigs to sacrifice them and sell them to the town's butcher. However, their business wasn't doing well. They lost many litters and their sales were declining. It was a peculiar family since it only had two members: Johann Smith, a middle-aged farmer, and his young daughter Peppa Smith. Johann's wife and mother of the child was in prison. She had been arrested a few years ago for attacking her husband with a machete while she was drunk. Poor Peppa, apart from being Mark's neighbor, she was also one of his best friends. He remembers her as a nice and meek girl, despite everything that happened to her. She had freckles on her face and was a bit chubby. She certainly inherited the physical attributes of her father. Some days, Mark would join Peppa to feed her pigs. And sure enough, from all of them, she had a few favorites. It was a small family of pigs. The male pig was a huge and obese animal who ended up becoming half-blind due to an infection. The female could only have two piglets since she wasn't very fertile. One was a very charming male piglet that had a very curious characteristic. The sounds he made weren't oinks like the rest of his species, but fierce grunts instead. For Peppa, those piglets' growls sounded like the roars of a big dinosaur. The other piglet made normal oinks, but her size was extremely big for her age. She was probably the product of some sort of mutation while in the womb of her mother. And boy, did she look huge when compared to the others. Peppa and Mark used to make drawings with chalk on the walls of the barn. One particular day, while Mark was drawing a flower, since he wasn't very imaginative, his friend Peppa was drawing some sort of forest that seemed a bit eerie. With a pink piece of chalk, she also drew her favorite family of pigs, all of them using dresses and shirts, which made them look pretty funny. Peppa saw that Mark liked what she drew, and so she proudly introduced to him her work of art. On one hand, there was Mama Pig. By her side was George, who was holding a stuffed dinosaur because he liked to roar like them. Behind was Peppa Pig, who wore glasses because he couldn't see very well. And the last member of the family was Peppa Pig. Peppa gave that piglet her own name because she was very fond of her and was also similar to her. Peppa was so happy with her drawing that she rushed to get her father so he could see it. When Mr. Johann came and looked at the drawing, his reaction was one of exaggerated anger. He yelled at Peppa that he had warned her thousands of times to not get attached to the animals, because she knew very well what their destiny was. In fact, he had just fixed the meat grinder, so he was going to turn it on to continue production. Peppa's favorite family was going to be the first one to be sacrificed due to their diseases. The animals she had drawn so lovingly on the wall had their hours numbered, and the next day they would be hanging from hooks at the butchery. Peppa started crying and came closer to Mark for him to hug her. But her father blocked her and took her to help him grind some waste to give to the pigs to eat. Little Peppa was devastated, and Mark could hear her weeping even from his own house, while Johann butchered the animals with his machete. A while later, Peppa went back to Mark with her hands covered in blood. He was sure that was the blood of Peppa's favorite pigs. Between tears, she used that blood to paint red the dress of her drawings still in the barn's wall. She drew a big smile in the pig's face and stopped crying. She raised her gaze to look at Mark, slowly got closer to him, and whispered if he could help her grind the rest of the waste. She said her father was resting and she was in charge of finishing up. Mark accepted without thinking it twice and followed her to the grinder. It was an immense and very powerful automatic machine with a very towering appearance. Peppa turned it on and it started making a sharp and deafening sound.
Teddy loves tug of war. In his lifetime, he will pull hundreds of tons. That's why he needs a tailored recipe from IAMS to help him stay fit. IAMS, who I am.
Mark helped her drag how they could a big stinking bucket filled with viscera and meat. The content was so thick and it was so bloody that it was difficult to distinguish what it actually contained. Mark was having a hard time trying not to throw up, so he stepped aside while Peppa threw the contents of the bucket in the machine. It emitted a mechanical crunch, as if it was having a hard time breaking down the meat. Maybe Mr. Johan didn't fix the machine as well as he thought? But suddenly, Mark froze in shock when he saw Peppa take out some sort of long limb out of the bucket. One that looked very similar to a human arm. He couldn't believe it, until he could perfectly distinguish that the limb ended in a human hand. He looked at Peppa with a horrified expression, but she kept on doing her job unemotionally. She realized that on one of the fingers there was a small golden wedding ring. She took it out and looked at it for a few moments. She grunted in disgust, threw the ring to one corner of the barn, and then threw the entire arm into the machine, which kept on roaring and squealing. Mark averted his gaze and didn't want to look again during the unending moments that Peppa took to pour the rest of the bloody content in the bucket. Through the other side of the machine, from which a thick and stinking paste was coming out, started to spurt a lot of blood that was being shot all over the walls. When she finally finished, Peppa turned off the machine and a deafening silence then took place. She then grabbed a shovel, shoveled a portion of those bloody and ground remains, threw it into a wheelbarrow, and took it to her favorite family of pigs. They eagerly ate the remains while she lovingly petted them. Mark joined her without uttering a single word until it got dark. After it was all over, Peppa said goodbye and got into her house. Days passed by and Mark didn't see any more signs of activity at the Smith's farm. The other neighbors got worried and alerted the local police. They arrived at the farm but didn't find Johan nor little Peppa anywhere. After many searching sessions throughout the area, the Smiths were declared as missing and the farm was shut down. Mark sat at his house porch to see how the police transported the animals, including those who were part of Peppa's beloved family. He then went to take a last look at Peppa's drawing, his friend's masterpiece, which would then be burned into his brain forever. He never told the police anything about what he saw, since he didn't want to incriminate his best friend, and because it made no sense since that nightmare was over now. He repressed those events deep in his mind and never thought about them again, as if they never happened. Many years later, when Mark became an adult, he was at a bar with a friend. They were celebrating that Mark's friend managed to get an internship contract at a TV station. But to be able to work there full-time, he had to design a project for a new cartoon show for children. Something happy and colorful with animals as protagonists. His friend was desperate and couldn't think of anything worthwhile. Thus, Mark immediately thought about that drawing Peppa made in her barn. And thus, Mark decided to share with his friend a story he heard when he was little. The story of a little piglet named Peppa Pig. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next episode!